After working with thousands of entrepreneurs, I started to recognize there are 3 major mistakes that almost all unheard entrepreneurs are making that lead to their content staying unheard. So we're going to break down all those and how to fix it in this episode. So keep listening. Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Hey everybody, it's Brandon, and I'm going to give you a warning right now. This episode may offend you. You may recognize you're doing some of the biggest mistakes right now, and it might challenge your beliefs because you've been told this is what you're supposed to do. And that triggers some people. Not my intention, but it might. So I'm going to give you a warning right now that I may say some things are mistakes and it might be exactly what you're doing. But if you don't have the results with your content that you want, I encourage you to pay attention to what we're talking about and to pay attention to what we're saying versus getting triggered. And here's the thing. This is one of the reasons why we stand out, is because we go against the norm. We go against the grain. And I want you to even think about, how can you do this inside of your company, inside of your brand, inside of your messaging, inside of your content? How can you take the things that people think are normal, that you know are causing suffering, and how can you fix that for them? How can you position and create a product that fixes that for them? If you can do that, it's going to be a really powerful thing to be able to do, to create, and it leads to really fast growth. So what we're going to talk about today are the 3 things that lead to unheard content. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that have been taught for a really long time are exactly what lead people to unheard content. So I'm just going to dig in, and we're just going to get right into number 1. If you listen to me for any amount of time, this probably does not surprise you. It is a theme that we've talked about for at least 2 years. It's been the theme of some of our biggest launches, but it's the thing that people continue to do. I just don't get it. And what that is, the number 1 mistake that leads to unheard content. It leads to people being consistent. It leads to people putting in a ton of work with not getting a lot of traction, is focusing all, or even sometimes 70% or more of the content they're doing as educational, how-to, step-by-step tutorials. Now, I'm just going to say, we do need that. So don't get all mad and offended if you're doing a ton of how-to content and you're like, oh, no, this is what I got to do. You got to be able to teach and add value, blah, blah. We do need that. But I'm going to show you why that's a mistake to do it 100 or even 70% of all your content. And a couple of reasons why. There's a lot to unpack here. So let's start with this. There's this concept they call the content circle of death. And what the content circle of death is just imagine a circle. If you're watching me on the video, here's the circle. There's a circle, and that circle represents your niche. And you are inside that circle, right? And you're an expert, and you're teaching all the steps, and you're teaching all the education, and you're teaching all of that stuff. Well, the niche does grow, right? That circle does get bigger and bigger and bigger. But what happens is you get competitor 1, competitor 2, competitor 3 coming in. And as the competitors start to come in, you literally start to cut the circle, the niche, in half, and then in thirds, and then in fourths, and then in fifths and sixths. And what's happening is there's more competitors coming in faster than the niche can grow. And where this starts becoming a problem is that you're not the only person with your skills or zone of genius. There's other experts out there that teach relatively the same thing as you, right? So what happens is when you get expert 10, 20, 30, sometimes 100 or 1,000 experts that are all teaching the same thing, and you get more and more coming in every day, and you are all saying relatively the same thing. Like your content and your steps and things are relatively going to be very similar. That's why you blend in. That's why no one's paying attention to you, because you're saying the exact same thing as everyone else. It's saturated. People don't want to hear the same thing over and over again. There's got to be something different, right? So what happens is you get stuck in this content circle of death. Now, here's what happened over the years, a lot of these gurus and people teaching content, that's what they did. They did all how-to educational content. And the reason why they succeeded is because there was no competition. They didn't have to deal with 1,000 experts all teaching the same thing. So they're just teaching you what they did, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's still value in it. But most people will continue to stay blend in, or will continue to blend in with everyone else because they continue to do how-to content saying the same thing as everyone else. And they get stuck in the content circle of death. And when you look at the best people out there, like Gary Vaynerchuk, Simon Sinek, Brene Brown, Mel Robbins, start looking around, they don't just teach and teach and teach and give tutorials and tutorials and tutorials. In fact, if we look at TED Talk, which is one of the most popular styles of content out there, look at any TED Talk, they aren't just giving you steps and tutorials. And that's another thing we got to talk about is what education actually means. What most people will do is they sit there and they do tutorials. Here, steps 1, 2, and 3. Like, I got to do educational content. I'm saying, no, we'll talk about some things you can do here in a second besides educational content. But even if you do go to teach, even if you are going to teach something, some type of education, it doesn't have to be in the step-by-step format. And almost every expert out there does tutorials on step 1, step 2, and step 3. But when we look at TED Talks, they teach and they add value and they educate, but there's never steps. When you look at Simon Sinek, he does a ton of educational content, but never in the steps format. It's never step 1, step 2, and step 3, because tutorials are what everyone goes to as a default. So number one, you shouldn't be doing all educational content. And then if you do educational content, it shouldn't be all step-by-step tutorials. We look at Gary Vaynerchuk. He does a lot of teaching, but it never gives you a tutorial. Why is that? Why are the top people out there that are all succeeding either not using educational content, or when they are using educational content, are not giving you step-by-step tutorials? Why is that? Because they want contrast. They want to be different. They focus on shifting perspective. And Gary Vaynerchuk is the king at that. He's very good at that. All of them are. Every TED Talk gets you to see something in a way you haven't seen it before. There's an art to it. I mean, it's one of the things that we teach and we help people figure out. But mistake number one is focusing all on education. And then when you do education, it's all step-by-step tutorials over and over and over again. And you just blend in. That's the number one mistake that leads to unheard content. Now, I got this from my friend, Dr. Shannon Irvin. She talks about gas pedal and brake things. Now, the reason why I don't think people should focus all their content on educational stuff is because what educational things are gas pedal things. They are things that can propel people forward. They can help people accomplish something. But what happens is if someone has their foot on the brake at the exact same time, doesn't matter how many gas pedal things you give them, they're not going to move forward. Sometimes you can add more value in someone's life by taking their foot off the brake. So education is a gas pedal thing that can propel someone forward. It can get them to accomplish something. But if their foot is on the brake at the exact same time, then it does them absolutely no good. Yet that's where majority of entrepreneurs stay, and that's where the unheard entrepreneur stays. The unheard entrepreneur focuses mainly on gas pedal, educational, step-by-step tutorials for 70% or more of their content, and they never move out of that space. And with COVID and everything, it's raised a huge amount of awareness of online education. It's given people opportunities and forced people to start businesses. So there's going to be more and more competitors coming in. You're going to start blending in even more than you have before if you don't start to change. So that's the number one mistake, is all educational. Now, we do have a video series coming out. You can go to brandonlucero.com/content revolution to sign up for this. That's going to walk you through how to fix it, what you should be doing. So just to give you guys some ideas, there's types of videos that we created called thought reversals. And what thought reversals do is they're basically the brake pedal removing type of content. Thought reversals are how you get people to take their foot off the brake, which some could argue, and I would actually argue this, that's actually the most valuable thing you can do for anybody. removing a belief that's causing some kind of stuttering or causing them to stay stuck, that is a brake pedal removing thing. And thought reversals help you do that. We talk about that in the video series. We talk about it in this podcast. I'm sure you can look back in some of the episodes and where we talk about thought reversals, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But that's one of the number one mistakes is they focus all on educational content and it's all step-by-step stuff, even though the evidence is all around. The experts are all around you. Just look around at the people that are soaring to the top entrepreneurs, the top influencers, the top thought leaders do not base their content on step-by-step tutorials. You can sit there and argue with me all you want, but all I have to do is just go look at Gary Vaynerchuk, look at Simon Sinek, look at Lewis Howes, look at Mel Robbins, look at Brene Brown, look at all of them. It's never a step-by-step. Heck, I mean, even look at the best-selling books out there. The best-selling books don't even go, here's step 1, do this. Here's step 2, do this. Step 3, do this. They might to some degree, but there's a lot of perspective shifting stuff. There's a lot of removing your foot off the brake. There's a lot of counterexamples, and which is all stuff we talk about inside the Video 4X effect. They communicate in the way where this person's subconscious goes, yes, that makes sense. Yes, that makes sense. Yes, that makes sense. Versus going, do this, do this, do this, do this. They might say, do this. And then it's all this perspective shifting language that gets you to go do it or remove your foot off the brake or gives you a different angle or perspective on things. So that's number one. Mistake number one is they focus mainly on educational content almost all the time, and then it's usually step-by-step content as well. Now, the second mistake that people focus on is generalized messaging. And there's a couple of reasons for this, and so I'll go through the different reasons. And what I mean by generalized messaging is that I can literally take what you're saying and put it on anyone's sales page, and it's still going to make sense. I can take it and put it on your competitor's sales page, and they probably have something very similar to that going on. Okay, so that's what generalized messaging is. Now, there's a couple of reasons why generalized messaging happens. Number one is that people teach from knowledge and not knowing. So we talk about this a lot. So if you heard this before, just bear with me while we go through it again for the new listeners. But knowledge versus knowing. And I'm going to use the bike example. If you go to college and learn how to ride a bike, through college, you get a degree on how to ride a bike, but you never actually rode the bike. You just learned about how to do it. You have a degree on it. You have the knowledge of how to ride a bike. You're not going to be able to get on the bike and go, right? Because you have the knowledge of it. However, if you didn't go to college, or even if you did, you get on the bike and you actually learn how to ride a bike. Well, guess what? You have a knowing. You know how to do it. You can communicate on a deeper level. You know exactly what it feels like to pedal, how to bounce, where to hold, how to do the brakes, what it feels like. You know the thoughts that are going through someone's head. You know the thoughts that are going through your head. You know the fears. You can communicate all of those because you have a knowing. The person who operates from the knowledge phase, they do not understand the knowing. So if you communicate from the knowing, you have a much deeper communication style than the person who teaches from the knowledge. You want to know why our messaging is so effective? Because I know communication styles. I know everything that we talked about in step number one. But number two, I was in your shoes. I had to go through the transformation to learn messaging. I know exactly what your feelings are. I know exactly what you're doing. I know exactly what thoughts are going through your head. I know the feelings that you have in the pit of your stomach when nothing's working out, because I went through those. I'm literally communicating from a place of knowing. It's the same thing with how to swim. You go get a degree on how to swim and you start giving swimming lessons, probably not going to be a very good swim instructor because you literally have no idea how to swim. You know the steps, right? You know the steps of what to do, but you don't know how to do it. And that's what the knowing is. I personally would rather learn how to swim from someone who's been in the water and has swam and is pretty good at it versus someone who got 10 degrees on how to swim from a college. And that's the thing, is it's knowledge versus knowing. And unfortunately, there are so many people out there that are teaching you how to brand your business that have never successfully branded a business. There's a lot of people teaching you how to be wealthy that have never actually been wealthy. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. If you find yourself in that spot, there's nothing wrong with that. Knowledge, you heard it before, knowledge is power. It's good to give people knowledge and to give them education. But you just have to know you're not going to be able to communicate that at the level of someone with the knowing. And if you are someone who has knowing in what you teach, you need to access that knowing in order to communicate at the highest level possible. Because if you have the knowing of something and you're not using it to your advantage, you're basically saying, here's my strongest weapon, I don't want to use it. Why would you ever do that? You went through the struggles, you went through and put the energy in, you invested in learning the knowing. Use that to your advantage. Access the thoughts that you had, the things that you were doing, the feelings that you had, specific things, very specific things. And so to give you an example, when I say things like, I put out content consistently and I just wanted to climb to the top of a mountain and scream, I can help you. I'm sure you've heard me say that before. That was literally a thought that I had. That's how I felt when I was putting out content and no one was listening and no one was resonating. And I saw people all around me building bigger audiences. That's literally how I felt. So I knew my audience probably feels that. And if they do, I want to connect with people who feel that. And so when I say that, I might say it to 1,000 people, there might be 500 who have that exact thought. And I'm now establishing a much deeper connection with those 500 people because I'm tapping into the knowing. That's number one. Number two, the second reason why people's messaging is very generalized is because they focus almost everything off of keywords and popular topics or surveying their audience and doing whatever their audience tells them to do. And although there is value and we want to do that, what happens is people do that all the time. They let popular keywords and they let search traffic and then they let survey results from the audience dictate what their message is, dictate what their content is. And if you do that, you really have no message. You're letting external things influence your messaging. Now, we do want to do those. There is value in those things. So I'm not saying not to do those things, but here's what I'm saying is what you want to do first is you want to figure out what your message actually is. Break down the specifics of what your message is, what you're going to talk about, what your values are, what your identities are, and create what I call the messaging ecosystem. This is what we teach you inside the Video 4X program, how to create that messaging ecosystem. And then you look at the keywords. Then you look at the survey results. And you only do the ones that you want to talk about. You only do the ones that fit within your messaging ecosystem because then you have a consistent message. For example, if I surveyed my audience and they said, I want to learn how to SEO videos on YouTube, I am not going to do a piece of content on that. Number one, because I don't want to talk about that, even though I could. Number two, it doesn't fit inside my messaging ecosystem. That is literally not a part of the Video 4X Effect program. So I'm just not going to do it. And because of that, I'm able to create a very consistent message. I start to attract people that are aligned with my message. When I start going wide and random and doing all this stuff, you start to attract these weird rando people that don't really care about your core message or anything. Everything is scattered. No one really knows what you stand for. So if I was to survey my audience and someone said, I want to learn how to create a video focused on attracting a specific identity, well, guess what? I would do that video in a second because I love talking about it, number one, but number two, it fits underneath my messaging ecosystem. So mistake number two is very generalized messaging, and that usually stems from teaching from knowledge versus knowing. You should be teaching from the knowing. And then also focusing a lot on keywords and survey results and doing everything your audience tells you to do. Mistake number three is thinking that vulnerability builds connection, and it doesn't. It can, but it doesn't 100% of the time. And here's the reason why, is vulnerability isn't the reason why people build connection. Vulnerability releases something. It releases a story. It releases identity. It releases pain. It releases emotions. And those are the things that actually build connection with people. So especially values, identities, and experiences. Those are like the three things that vulnerability can release that truly build a deep connection. And if we look at that, whereas I'm vulnerable and I've shared my experience of being $40,000 in debt. that story is what's going to build connection, not the fact that I was vulnerable. The story is what built the connection. So if someone else was in debt, and I know this is happening because there's been tons of people who have reached out since then, thanking me for that episode, thanking me for sharing that story because they are going through the exact same thing. And guess what? I now have a connection with them. They now connect with me more because I am more relatable and relevant to them because I shared that story. I reveal a lot of the times that I'm a parent, and I tend to relate more to parent entrepreneurs. Not all the time, but I do get a good amount of parent entrepreneurs. And they like the fact that I'm also a parent, whether they realize it or not. There's a subconscious thing going on. So if we look at the $40,000 in debt, that was an experience that I went through, and some people will connect with me because of that experience or a shared experience, or they feel the pain of that experience. Being a parent is a part of my identity. So I connect with people through identity, and the next one is values. So if I'm vulnerable and reveal some of my values, like for example, maybe I should share a story about when I operated with integrity around something, and you're someone who also operates with integrity or has a value of integrity, well, guess what? I'm now connecting with you because of the value, the shared value, which is integrity. It's not because I was vulnerable. Again, vulnerability releases the things that build connection. And so those three things, there's more than just these three, but the three main ones are shared experience, shared identity, shared value. And shared beliefs is another one. But those are the three main things. So vulnerability doesn't build connection. If we're intentional with what we're releasing, that will build the connection. Now I'm going to give you guys one bonus one before we wrap up this episode. There's one more mistake. And I see this one all the time. And it's organic versus paid. And I think people are either, we got to go organic, we have to go paid. And I think if you're one or the other, it leads to your content remaining unheard. If you're going all organic, and there's been plenty of examples of people who have gone all organic and they've done really well. But if we're trying to build a business, a course business, a program business, service business, and we want to go all organic, it's very slow and it's not scalable. I can't go in there and say, all right, I launched and I had 1,000 opt-ins and I made $100,000. Let's go bigger. I want 3,000 opt-ins and I'm going to do $300,000 this time. You can't do that if you have all organic efforts. It's uncontrollable. It's unmanageable. It's unpredictable and it's unscalable. However, if I went to go get 1,000 opt-ins and I made $100,000 and I used ads and I said, great, now I want $300,000 on the next launch. All I have to do is just spend more money on ads. It's scalable, it's predictable, it's reliable for the most part. But at the same time, we don't want just paid either, because converting cold traffic is one of the hardest things you can do. So we want both, and they both help each other. The way I like to look at it is it's a bicycle. If only the front tire is pumped up, you can move forward. If only the back tire is pumped up, you can move forward. But if both of them were pumped up, you move forward at a whole nother rate. It's a lot easier and a lot faster. And it's the same thing with organic and paid. So one of the biggest mistakes that leads to unheard content is that people focus either all on organic, and it's a very slow because no one knows you exist, or paid, which is very fast because you can get exposure overnight, or vice versa. They both need each other to work. The organic efforts that you have with a warm audience will definitely help your paid efforts. So they go hand in hand, and you want both as a focus. But I see so many times that people focus on one or the other, and it leads to unheard content. So with that said, what I would love for you guys to do is, if any of this resonates, you realize you are making some of these mistakes. Again, it's not a time to play victim and go like, oh, and get triggered and Brandon doesn't always talk about blah, blah, blah. I mean, you can do that, and that's fine if you want to, and you can go off and do whatever it is you want to do, and hopefully your content gets better. But if you're someone who actually recognizes this is a real problem and I want to fix it, and I want to start using identity and focusing on real transformational content like Simon Sinek and Brene Brown and Mel Robbins and all those people, well, what I want you to do is go to brandonlucero.com/content revolution and sign up for our video series. Our video series is going to walk you through everything that you need to do in order to start fixing all of this. So that's brandonlucero.com/content Content Revolution. The link should be around this podcast episode somewhere. And you can also go to our Instagram to find those links at IamBrandonLucero.com. And like always, if you guys appreciate this episode, you appreciate this podcast, I'd be so grateful. And I'm going to ask you to head over to iTunes and leave us a review over there. Again, I would be so grateful for that. And then all the support that we get just makes putting out this podcast so worth it. So head over there, leave us a review, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.